Now I've seen a couple of people on the good old internet criticizing the Raiden Shogun's character and story, and honestly, despite what the title says, I can understand where they're coming from. The abrupt change from her cold, harsh, and cruel personality in the Archon quest to the cute, innocent, and marketable attitude in her story quest really threw people, including me, off guard and kinda made the people lose faith in her character's story. But the more we learned about her character, especially during the Act 2 of her story quests, I got more invested in her story. A girl who knew nothing but to fight and act as a shadow of her sister is left in a position where she is all alone, with all her friends gone, and her sister dying in a battle that she thinks she should have fought in instead. All of these losses at the same time. If that doesn't throw you into an emotional breakdown that will span for a couple hundred years, then I don't know what will. Oh, speaking of breakdowns, let's break down her character, personality, and story. A and her twin sister Makoto were both gods that participated in the Archon War, and they won over Inazuma and the dominion over the element Electro. They then decided that Makoto should be the ruler of Inazuma under the title of Raiden Shogun, while A would be her Kagemusha, or the Shadow Warrior. Makoto took over all of the Archon work and celestial duties, while A would be the one to do all the fighting and commanding. Both of them had pretty different ideologies, but had the same ideal, eternity. But A had a strict idea of the stillness of eternity. She believed that eternity is the prolongment of a moment, while her sister, Makoto, had a more laid-back, anything-goes, ever-changing eternity, and believed that the constantly changing and the ambitious drive of the world all add up to a true eternity. She was also good friends with a couple of people, the Tengu General Sasayuri, the Oni Mikoshi Chiyo, and the Kitsune Saigu. Her life was all good and happy and fun and nice. Unfortunately, here is where it all falls apart and goes downhill for little A, because tragedy after tragedy after tragedy occurred right after the other, and she gets the big sad. The first to go was the Tengu General Sasayuri, who aided A in a battle against Orobashi, because Orobashi thought it was a good idea to expand Watatsumi and invade Yashirori Island. This resulted in a bloody and brutal fight between Watatsumi and Inazuma that costed so many casualties, and even the death of the Tengu General Sasayuri. Then, after that, a nation called Canria with a guy named Rhindaughter who had godlike alchemical abilities, and the gods themselves decided to juke it out and make it everyone's problem. So the Cataclysm unleashed countless monsters into Inazuma, and they ravaged everything. Makoto was absent, so A, along with Mikoshi Chiyo and the Kitsune Saigu and other prominent people of Inazuma, had to defend it, of course. Mikoshi Chiyo helped in fighting the monsters until she was ultimately swallowed by one. She managed to get herself out of the monster's belly by tearing it out, but she was tainted by darkness and sin within the belly. The taint was so severe to the point where she went against A herself. With no other choice, A had to fight her very own friend, which ended up in Mikoshi Chiyo being severed of one of her arms and one of her horns. She fled to the forest, and what comes afterward is unknown, but her fate was sealed. It's said that her life ended due to being mistakenly seen as a monster. Her beauty, that was compared with the moon itself, was reduced to being mistaken as a foul beast. Pretty funny because the moon is a dead corpse. A was pretty desperate at this point. She has lost countless troops, fought her friend, and her sister was nowhere to be found. It's also at this point where she realized what's going on and wanted to go search for her sister. But at the same time, she didn't want to abandon Inazuma in a state of crisis. This dilemma ended when the Kitsune Saigu herself reassured her that she can take over defending the nation. Although both of them didn't mention it, they both knew that it would end in tragedy. And they jinxed it. They jinxed it. The Kitsune Saigu had to step into the depths, sacrificing herself to protect Inazuma. There, in the abyss, darkness consumed her. As she was being gnawed by the darkness, she had one last plea: to preserve her memories in Inazuma. And so it did. Her memories returned to the ley lines of Inazuma, giving us a tear-jerking, not at all wearable mask. Don't use this mask, please. Concentrated memory of the Kitsune Saigu, Kazari. As A rushed to the place she knew her sister would be, she was too late. Makoto has already fallen in battle. Makoto wasn't a skilled fighter as A, so A never got the chance to talk with her one last time. All she was left with was her thoughts. Thoughts of why it wasn't her that went into this battle. Why she was never informed of her departure. Was it to shield her, or is it her fault that she wasn't told? A salvaged the remaining consciousness her sister had and brought it back to Inazuma. When she arrived to Inazuma, she stepped up to her sister's title as the shogunate and one of the 7. She also noticed a sudden big tree that appeared called the Sacred Sakura as she returned from Kanria. And this tree helped in the battle against all the monsters invading Inazuma, which brought back peace to the nation. After losing Sasayuri in a battle against Orobashi, then having to fight her own friend Chiyo, abandoning the Kitsune Saigo in tragedy, and reaching only the final moments before the death of her sister, it's unsurprising that her ideal of an unchanging and still eternity would be even stricter. She grew vastly more scared of erosion, to the point she wanted to transfer her consciousness to a robot, and that she did. With the help of Yae Miko, she created the very first puppet as a test, a prototype to this project, a proof of concept, if you will. This prototype was supposed to be used as a storage for her gnosis, but it had a slight water leak problem in its eye, so A discarded it. But she didn't want to be mean, so she just took away his powers and sent him off to the countryside to wander around. Surely nothing story relevant will happen to him, right? After a while, she finally created a puppet version of herself, programmed it to follow A's idea of eternity, uphold that ideal to the teeth, and then transferred her consciousness into her sister's sword in the plane of euthymia. This is definitely not a bad idea, by the way. It's just giving a robot all this power, right? Several years passed, and now we're 1 year before the Traveler showed up. A was deceived into enacting the Vision Hunt Decree and the Sakoku Decree, banning any travels in and out of the country, and seizing all visions, and laying it in the statue of the omnipresent god. This was the start of an insane era of Inazuma. Foreigners became stuck in the country, the people of Inazuma lived horrible lives, a foreign military force was acting in the shadows, controlling everyone as if they were mere marionettes, and the people with visions had their ambitions and memories stripped away from them. Inazuma was in a miserable state, until a certain traveler from afar who was just looking for their lost sibling shows up and ends up saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm gonna fix everything." So they do exactly that. The Traveler, who is by the way the enemy of eternity, don't trust him, tries to stop the Vision Hunt ceremony from taking the vision of their friend Thoma. And this ends up with the Traveler entering the plane of euthymia itself, confronting the real A. A succeeded in defeating the Traveler, but the Traveler unfortunately escaped with Thoma. This Traveler comes back in front of A in the Tenshukaku, the governing building of Inazuma. This Traveler duels and defeats the diplomat from Snezhnaya, and the Raiden Shogun slays that diplomat for her loss. After the Traveler leaves the Tenshukaku, the Raiden Shogun once again does the Musono Itotachi to finally extinguish the threat to eternity. This is surprisingly stopped, however, by a person wielding 2 visions. The Traveler once again enters the Muso Ishin, with Yae Miko this time, and the powers of the seized vision. With this, A was sadly defeated, but the Traveler and Yae Miko gave some pretty good points about A's flawed ideal of eternity and gave her a bit of therapy, so it's all good now. A abolished the Vision Hunt Decree, returned every single vision that was taken away, arrested the Kanjo and Tenryou Commission for deceiving the Shogun, and reformed her and the puppet's ideals of eternity. But after a while A and Traveler were talking about what happened 500 years ago and rediscussing the idea of eternity, the Raiden Shogun puppet, who had little progress on her reprogramming of the ideal of eternity, has started to go against A, making her unable to do certain tasks. This ended up in a battle between A and the Raiden Shogun taking place in the very remaining consciousness of Makoto from 500 years ago. The battle spanned for over 500 years. But A emerged victorious, with the final verdict of her ideal of eternity. Makoto got her closure as A finally realized the true meaning of eternity. Makoto, using all of what remains of her powers, gives A seed. She plants this and it grows into an enormous tree, which turns out to be the sacred Sakura tree. It all comes full circle as she realizes that in everything that happened to Inazuma 500 years ago, all the losses that she had suffered and every single pain she had to go through and the aftermath she had to endure, Makoto planned and planted the very same Sakura tree that would help her heal from her own trauma and scars, for her to become better than Makoto, for her to become the most fit ruler for Inazuma, and for her to have the utmost ideal of eternity.